Welcome to our channel. Today's story does not have the most clear beginning, but with every minute of viewing it becomes more and more exciting. My name is Maria. I must confess that my life has been rather charmed. Blessed with an angelic face and a physique that's been complimented as ideal for intimacy, I enjoyed the attention of numerous men. This continued until I turned 24, when a serious conversation with my parents prompted me to settle down and consider my civic duty of providing them with grandchildren. As an only child of wealthy parents, I never had the need for serious qualifications or strenuous work. Despite my father's attempts to involve me in the family business, my lack of interest persisted. Enter Dave, the man who seemed perfect, physically fit, sharp, with a business degree and an MBA. My parents adored him, and a year after we met, we were married. Less than a month later, I found out I was pregnant. Over the next 10 years, I played the role of the beautiful soccer mom, driving my kids in a high-end BMW to our spacious mansion in the greenest suburb. Our lifestyle involved Dave, or the 15-year-old girl next door looking after the kids, while I fulfilled my role as a chairperson or board member of various charitable organizations. Saturdays were reserved for shopping with girlfriends, while Sundays were dedicated to church and family lunches at my parents' house. Discussions about my father retiring and Dave taking over the family business became frequent after lunch. Dave and I, in line with societal expectations, attended church and occupied a bench sponsored by my grandfather. Life was comfortable, and everything seemed perfect, until one day when a mistaken keystroke changed everything. An accidental internet encounter opened my eyes to a side of myself I didn't know existed. The idea of being shackled, bound, and helpless while a strong man took control fascinated me. Initially, I tried to deny these newfound desires, but my sexual frustration grew. I discovered a forum where people shared their experiences, and eventually, I connected with a dominant man named Darren. Photos and conversations intensified my obsession, leading me to plan a meeting with him. My conscience remained strangely silent as I prepared for this clandestine encounter. I made a list of everything I needed, and Darren's persistence intensified as he detailed his intentions. I justified my actions, convincing myself that this affair posed no threat to my marriage, as my husband, Dave, was never supposed to find out. I meticulously cleared digital footprints, storing evidence on a hidden memory card. The affair progressed, and I realized the risks involved. Darren's demands escalated, and I hinted at the possibility of regular meetings. Despite the inherent risk of being discovered, my obsession persisted. I researched how not to get caught, acknowledging the popular belief that cheaters are always exposed, but determined to challenge this notion. Instances of infidelity often remain undisclosed, and I speculate that for every instance brought to light, there are 10 concealed ones. Over the next 3 weeks, my routine returned to normal, dropping off the kids at school, hastily going through pictures and videos agreed upon with Darren, and immersing myself in stories of unfaithful wives until it was time to retrieve the kids. Unbeknownst to me, my friends grew weary of my consistent rejections when they invited me to meet up. At the start of this endeavor, I recognized that altered behavior is a significant indicator of a discovered affair. Upon honest self-reflection, I realized I was unwittingly broadcasting these signals. I compelled myself to revert to normal conduct when being observed, particularly remembering to initiate intimacy with my husband. Additionally, I drafted a set of precautions. I planned to rendezvous with Darren in an obscure part of town where recognition would be unlikely. Given my husband's frequent business travels, a consequence of his role as a business development manager at his father's company, substantiating his location posed no challenge. I intended to request that he capture a room photo when I called him in the evening, expressing how much I missed him and wanted to envision his surroundings. To minimize the risk of being caught, I would leave the house after 10 p.m. to avoid calls or unexpected visits. I decided to leave my mobile phone and car at home in case of tracking devices. To enhance anonymity, I added a wig and other disguise elements to my plan, storing them in my tennis club locker to minimize visibility. The motel room would be paid for in cash, and I'd book it either in person days ahead or through a phone call from one of the charities I volunteered for. A taxi, picked up at a nearby park, would be my mode of transportation to avoid drawing attention from other cars in the driveway or neighbors observing me leaving at an unusual hour. While telephone booths were obsolete in our city, the only potential vulnerability in my plan was calling a taxi on my mobile. My best recourse was to promptly erase any record of the call. Having addressed matters with my husband and friends, the sole remaining predicament was the children. Our full-time nanny had to be home by 10 p.m., and entrusting them to someone unfamiliar was out of the question. The youngest was too young for sleepovers. The only plausible, albeit unattractive option, was to put the children to sleep and limit my time away. Let's consider departing at 10:15 p.m., taking a 1-hour taxi ride, spending 5 hours with Darren, another hour-long taxi ride, and potentially being back home by 5:15 a.m., just an hour before dawn, considering the current time of year. The purpose of the wig and coat, items I seldom wear, was to shield my identity from early morning dog walkers and insomniacs. Despite the frustration of putting my kids to bed, my obsession with my newfound fantasies intensified as my preparations progressed. However, as I approached the execution of my plans, I found myself grappling with the emerging problems. It required significant willpower to critically assess my intentions. To ensure uninterrupted results, I experimented with different over-the-counter sleeping pills, all deemed safe for small children. I determined doses that allowed me to stay awake with them when it was time for them to get up for school. This routine persisted for a week, ceasing only when Dave remarked on the altered habits. Concerns about the potential risks of meeting Darren surfaced during an internal security review session. Worries ranged from him turning out to be a serial killer to exceeding our agreed-upon boundaries. After some online investigation, I discovered Darren's email address with his initials and last name. To address potential risks, I subtly conveyed to him that I would leave clues about his identity in case of my disappearance. He assured me of my safety. I also recognized the vulnerability in the situation, where Darren might be caught cheating on his wife, potentially exposing me and my husband. To mitigate this risk, I insisted that he take the same precautions as I did. Although it was hard to believe that his wife was aware and approved of his meetings with other women, he complied. Darren provided an STD test, as I prefer unprotected sex, and there was no risk of unwanted pregnancy due to my regular use of birth control pills at 8:30 every morning. As evening approached, I donned the tight black dress Dave had bought me a couple of years ago, and my bag with toiletries and a few essentials for the night was already prepared. Dave's call, originating from a number matching the expected area code of his supposed location 3 hours away, appeared on the caller ID. The taxi was en route and the children were sound asleep in their cribs. I opted to pay in cash for 3 nights of room rental under a fictitious name. An extra night suggested by Darren, a reasonable idea, considering our limited quality time. Thoughts crossed my mind about the potential desire for more if the experience turned out to be enjoyable, especially with Dave away until his plane landed around lunchtime on Thursday. I contemplated my actions for the upcoming evenings, reasoning that expenses for a hotel room were inconsequential to someone of my affluent status. 3 nights. My strategy to purge these thoughts before they morph into a risky, long-term venture, where the likelihood of exposure skyrockets. It seemed like a prudent move. Logging into our computer to check for any last-minute emails from Darren yielded none. A glance at the deleted folder revealed no incriminating evidence. I swiftly sent a brief SMS to my prospective partner, notifying him of my imminent arrival. Observing the time on my watch, I realized it was the moment to head to the park and rendezvous with a taxi. Giving myself a final appraisal in the mirror, I pondered a momentary retreat. However, the mischievous side of me insisted otherwise, questioning what could possibly go awry. Placing my phone on the kitchen counter, I exited. By the time the taxi dropped me off at the motel, excitement had drenched me. The deserted surroundings were a welcome sight. A discreet knock on room 3110's door revealed Darren's foresight, a pre-attached "Do Not Disturb" sign. As Darren opened the door, only the bedside light illuminated the room. My initial enthusiasm waned. His appearance was a decade older and bulkier than his online photo suggested. Noticing nicotine-stained fingers and detecting the odor of alcohol and stale cigarettes on his breath, disappointment lingered. With just a brief greeting and a touch of our lips, he lunged at me. I heard the fabric tearing as he hastily removed my dress. Standing behind me, he placed a muscular hand on my shoulder and covered my mouth. Fumbling with the clasp of my bra, he impatiently yanked it off, his rough hand muffling my protests. Once naked, except for the rings, his ungentle hand aggressively explored my breasts. I hoped he remembered his pledge not to leave marks, but his breathing indicated a lack of self-control. Nearly stumbling over a bag I dropped on the floor, Darren ushered me to the bed. Without allowing me to speak, he pushed me onto it. My mouth was then covered with his shoulder as he secured my outstretched arms with cuffs attached to the bed, soft but made of real steel, rendering me motionless. Subsequently, he retrieved a harness from under the pillow, securing a ball in my mouth, the mechanics of which remained unclear to me. I found myself incapable of articulating anything beyond grunts and groans as he proceeded to fasten each ankle to the bedposts. Stepping back to admire his handiwork, he swiftly discarded his clothes while I reveled in the sensations. reveling in the feelings of helplessness. I believed I had made the right decision, thinking I could indulge in this 3-night escapade without any risk and with complete secrecy. Although I anticipated potential challenges in discontinuing this new hobby, I was confident that a bit of research could mitigate the associated risks.
Asterisk. Asterisk, Jen. It's Dave asterisk asterisk. My kids just called, and they woke up this morning to find Maria missing. Despite searching the entire house, she was nowhere to be found. Dave conveyed this information with urgency, causing his mother-in-law to express concern about his tone. She's not here. Can you come as soon as possible? Of course, I'll call you when I arrive. Having rushed home, Dave embraced his children, their worried eyes revealing their anxiety. Expressing gratitude to his relatives for their support, Dave discussed the possibility of involving the police again. Pete confirmed their previous response, emphasizing that without evidence to the contrary within the initial 48 hours, the assumption was that the person had voluntarily left. Everything in the house appeared orderly, with no signs indicating Maria's departure, except for her car remaining in the garage and her phone on the table near the back door instead of its usual place on the charger. Dave and Pete continued their conversation in the office, lowering their voices to a more confidential level. Discovering an over-the-counter baby sedative and a measuring cup on the kitchen table, Dave dismissed the notion that Maria could have intentionally drugged the children. Returning to his concerns, he noted that the last time the children saw their mother was when she put them to bed at 9:30 p.m. He then called everyone in their address book, but no one had seen Maria. The family focused on keeping the children occupied, struggling with sleepless nights. The next morning, Dave, exhausted, joined Pete in the kitchen. They exchanged pleasantries until Pete suggested checking Maria's email. If Dave had access and she hadn't changed her password, they could gain insights. In the office, they accessed her email account, finding it seemingly normal. Pete proposed checking the deleted items folder, but it was empty. They proceeded to the sent items folder, where they discovered a chilling message sent to Hardman a little after 10 o'clock on Monday evening. The ominous content heightened their anxiety. After clearing out her text messages folder, Dave shifted his focus and noticed a bottle of baby sedative from the previous night. Immediately, a realization struck him, and Peter, noticing Dave's reaction, arrived at the same conclusion. Could Maria have used the sedatives on her children? Dave wrestled with a mix of anger towards his wife and growing fear. The pieces were starting to suggest that Maria might have sedated her kids to meet someone on Monday and hadn't returned. Armed with this suspicion, Dave contacted the police again, although they remained hesitant to act. However, they advised him to have the children tested, which he promptly arranged. Later, he dropped them off at school and returned home. Frustrated and anxious, he emailed Hardman, urging Maria to return home for the sake of their worried children, also issuing a grave warning. As the agonizing hours of Wednesday evening mirrored the previous one, a call from the pathology lab early Thursday confirmed traces of sedatives in the children's blood samples, indicating potential foul play. The police, finally acknowledging the gravity of the situation, sought the email address retrieved from the computer, though they cautioned about its reliability. With nothing but anticipation, the concerned adults waited for further updates.
Meanwhile, I found myself outside my front door, overwhelmed and visibly distressed. Clutching my torn black dress, memories of the harrowing events of the past 3 days consumed me. The recollection of Darren's menacing presence and his cruel actions haunted me. I felt trapped and defenseless, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. The unexpected turn of events leading to Darren's demise left me in a state of shock and dread. The realization of my perilous predicament, coupled with the impending discovery, by my children, intensified my panic, leaving me anxiously awaiting any sign of help. Nonetheless, I gathered myself, contemplating the possibility of adjusting Darren's lifeless form to restrict my breathing once more. I ceased movement, succumbing to tears. Worries about my children's fate if left alone tugged at me. Would they seek help from neighbors, or perhaps utilize the speed dial sheet beside the home phone to call Dave or my parents? Neither option seemed ideal. Dave might panic and call my cell phone, eventually involving my parents. Imagining my mother discovering my absence, I pondered Dave's potential actions. Would he contact the police? Caught in a seemingly bleak situation, a glimmer of hope crossed my mind. The maid's late arrival provided a slim chance. If I could persuade her to locate the handcuff keys and release me, promising a substantial sum to dissuade immediate police involvement, I might secure $10,000 in cash discreetly. Swiftly returning home, I could apologize to the kids for oversleeping, take them to school, and then report the incident to the police, threatening legal action if details reached the media. It seemed like a plausible plan. 2 consenting adults involved in a legal activity gone awry. However, reality struck when I recalled booking the room for 3 days, a standard practice for daily maid service. My optimism crumbled further upon noticing the "Do Not Disturb" sign on the door handle, dashing any illusions of a discreet exit. A muffled sound escaped me, a mix of a moan and a sigh, the symbolic death knell of my once perfect life. Daylight filtered through slightly opened curtains, subtly raising the room temperature, offering a minor reprieve from my trembling state. The dire question surfaced. How long could one survive without water? My vague recollection suggested no more than 2 or 3 days. Regretfully, my disregard for academic learning, prioritizing appearances over knowledge, became apparent. A fleeting thought crossed my mind, contemplating the potential preference for death over the impending fate, sparing me from witnessing the destruction of my legacy and memory. As the sun ascended, casting light between the motel's rows, I abandoned hope for an escape that day. My tongue clung to the roof of my mouth, and I hoped I could converse quickly enough to dissuade the maid from summoning the police the next morning. Nightfall brought clarity. Some of my earlier hopeful musings seemed delirious, spawned from desperation and thirst. My last conscious acknowledgement before succumbing to headache-induced delirium was a simple fatalistic realization. I was undone, all due to one foolish act. I've never encountered the maid who discovered me, though the day I meet her armed with something formidable is a vision I entertain. My initial recollection is of being shaken on the gurney during the ambulance ride, connected to a device administering fluids due to my severe dehydration. Emergency personnel, recognizing the gravity of my condition, swiftly addressed it. My purse was placed beside me. The subsequent memory involves my resistance when someone attempted to take my bag while I was being wheeled to the hospital. I clung to it desperately. I intend to keep my identity concealed until I feel ready to contact my family, allowing myself a chance to craft a plausible narrative. I opted for anonymity, recuperating physically with the assistance of heat packs, an IV, and gradual sips of water. After lunch, when my mental faculties were sharper, the planning was disrupted by police questioning. Insisting on the truth, I emphasized their duty of care and threatened legal action if my story was leaked to the media. The departing sergeant left with a mixed expression of amusement and pity. By mid-afternoon, I had a credible story in place, relying on the assumption that my family, relieved by my sudden return, would refrain from probing too deeply. The staff doctor finally released me before 7 in the evening. Hastily donning my torn dress, I inquired about a nearby clothing store, only to receive a cold refusal from the nurse. Nevertheless, she called me a taxi, and I waited at the hospital entrance. Despite my composed demeanor, the evening news shattered my confidence and altered my life. The coverage centered on me, featuring images of me lying on the motel bed next to the deceased Darren, allegedly captured by the maid and sold to the media. My face, blacked out for legal reasons in the crime scene photos, was not afforded the same courtesy by the television cameras. Somehow, they obtained footage ahead of the departing ambulance, clearly showing me as the gurney was loaded. I lost consciousness and must have been almost carried to the waiting taxi. The person who provided the driver with my address remains a mystery. My next memory is standing here now, facing the execution yard, devoid of hope or the will to fight against the impending realities. My husband opened the door, and for about 300 milliseconds, I was hopeful. Glancing over his shoulder, I saw the TV tuned to the same station where I recently saw myself. He looked at me, questioning with a raised eyebrow. This was my moment to reveal the truth, to confess that I was kidnapped, handcuffed, and abused for 3 days, hoping for his empathy, not contempt. My phone lay on the table next to the door, my purse in hand and a glance at my attire. In that moment, any remaining fight in me dissipated. Overwhelmed with shame and defeat, I sank to my knees. Dave didn't utter a word. Silence spoke volumes. As if that weren't enough, a high-pitched voice behind me accused, "Really, Maria? Are you drugging your own children with sleeping pills?" It was my mother, passing judgment. If she condemned me, I knew my father would write me off. He loved Dave almost as much as he loved me. After the door slammed, the police arrived, asking to confirm my name. I was arrested, handcuffed, and taken to the station, facing charges. The evidence was presented: my fingerprints on the sedative bottle, my absence, and the children's blood tests. Denying seemed pointless. The media sensationalized the story: a famous mother drugging her children to go on a date, leading to her lover's death while tied to a bed for 3 days. After 4 nights in jail, with no bail posted, the state released me on my own recognizance. Outside the prison, the media awaited, making my walk the longest of my life until they eventually gave up. On the main street, I realized my superficial socialite friends would shun me, and my children, old enough to understand, had a caring father and involved grandparents. They didn't need me. With less than $200 in my wallet, I spotted an ATM across the street. Considering the odds, I decided, if the card worked, I'd head to the bus station. If not, I'd turn right towards the bridge and the long descent to the river. I inserted the first card, holding my breath, contemplating my uncertain future.